It's the most infamous ball in Trans-Tasman history.
He walked over to me and said that the bowler was going to bowl this ball underarm.
Where did that come from?
It's the ball that changed cricket forever.
It was an outrage.
That's big brother just pounding little brother back into the ground again.
We got an education that day in the lines that you were prepared to go right up to.
I won't say the word sheet.
Turning Australia's greatest hero into its greatest villain.
I described Greg Chappell's actions as an act of cowardice.
I don't think I was fit to captain Australia on that occasion.
To be brother and brother involved in that incident, man.
Two brothers.
It's one of the worst things I have ever seen.
That's not the Aussie way.
One ball that nearly 40 years on continues to divide us.
That's a disappointing finish. Disappointed Brian McKechnie, the crowd boo, and it's all over.
The kids started jumping the fence and running out, and this young girl tugged on my shirt sleeve, and I looked down at her and she was looking up at me and she said, "You cheated." At that moment, I thought that this might be a bit bigger than I'd even imagined.
Lily's pounding down like a machine. Pasco's making divots in the green.
In 1981, cricket was riding a new wave. For the first time, games were broadcast live across the Tasman. The World Series Cup circus had come to town.
This might be close. There's an appeal there.
Kerry Packer came along. He knew that live sport was the best product that he could have. So the more cricket he could get on TV, the better.
Now they're coming out in poo brown, whatever it was. It was a shocker. And we were canary yellow or in a green stripe or something like that.
The one-day international went forth and multiplied, and the personalities became giants in their time.
It brought a totally different audience to the game. The stadiums were packed.
No one was sure how much cricket people could play, and they were determined to find out.
When they advertised it on TV the night before, tomorrow at the SCG, Kiwis are taking on the Aussies.
The razzmatazz of cricket was underway.
Come and watch. Come on, Aussie, come on.
Slow delivery, Marsh under it.
I mean, we sang it. Is that catchy?
It was the endless summer of cricket. With Australia and New Zealand tied 1-1 in the World Series Cup finals, Melbourne came to a standstill for the crucial third game. A huge crowd poured into the world's biggest cricket arena.
Conditions absolutely marvellous. There's not a cloud in the sky. Final series, a best of 5, and the teams won all as they came to the Melbourne Cricket Ground today.
The MCG is a massive, massive ground. You know, boundaries to the fence. There's no ropes or anything like that. Screaming crowd, kids having a crack at you just as you're walking out, you know, so there was no holding back. There's plenty of froth coming from the crowd.
You know, in Melbourne, when it's hot, it is blinking hot.
I remember calling for Phil Ridings, who was chairman of the board and chairman of selectors at that stage, to come into the dressing room on the Sunday morning before the game. And I said, "Mate, is there any way we can reduce the overs here? This is ridiculous." And he said, "Greg, sorry, there's no way we can do it. It's only in the case of inclement weather." And I said, "Phil, this is far from clement. You know, this is not healthy. Someone's going to die out there."
Yeah, big day, and it was 1-1, so there was a bit of pressure on because, you know, at a best of 5, you don't want to go 2-1 down.
We were getting towards the end of the season, end of the summer, and we're all thinking not too far to go.
Captain Greg Chappell, sometimes considered the only Australian more important than the Prime Minister, found he almost had a workload to match.
Yeah, my phone could start ringing at 6 o'clock in the morning and maybe up until midnight at night because they knew where I was. I was a sitting duck.
Greg was doing everything. There was no coach, there was no media manager. The responsibility for that team all reposed in the captain at that stage. So he was fighting every battle that summer.
Winning the toss and choosing to bat, Chappell was fighting not just the New Zealand attack, but the conditions. This was the second game in 2 days, and the MCG pitch was just another problem for the Australian captain.
The big bone of contention was the centre square at the MCG was just unfit for any standard of cricket, let alone international cricket.
There was areas in the outfield which were bare, and the wicket was at times very, very ordinary.
There were 3 Chappells in the game that day. Younger brother Trevor was playing his first series in green and gold, and older brother Ian was in the commentary box. The Chappells had cricket in their blood.
Playing cricket in the backyard, I got beaten a lot. I learned to lose. I learned to compete. I learned to find strategies to, hang in there and try and be competitive.
A lot of players, I think, looked upon Greg Chappell as God.
He had that sort of lean and hungry look, that man who was prepared to do whatever it took to win a game, and usually would win a game by dint of his sheer excellence.
Greg had a certain style of leadership where he expected everyone else on the team to play up to his standards.
Greg mentally was absolutely, not ruthless is wrong, but he was disciplined and organised and all that sort of thing.
Hadley to Greg Chappell.
And that's a touch of class.
I felt like I was going pretty well, and I was really focused on just making sure that we got a good score and one that was going to be hard to chase down.
Every other opposition was saying, who are we going to get out first? Well, we've got to get Greg Chappell out first. If you want to destroy a team, destroy the captain first.
Well, the Kiwis had a plan to do exactly that. And a 22-year-old university student playing among his heroes had the chance to become one himself.
Greg had this habit of flicking the ball in the air. So I was out there and I think I just saw the ball and just must have made a decision to go for it.
What a catch! That is one of the best catches I've ever seen in my life.
I was pretty excited to see Greg go.
And Greg Chappell is staying there.
All of a sudden, things stopped. It was like, time had stopped.
Umpires are conferring. Sletton says he caught it.
What looked like the catch of the summer was about to become one of its biggest controversies, a crucial precursor to a much greater scandal to come. Under a baking hot Melbourne sun, the underdog Kiwis have just taken out Greg Chappell, turning the World Series Cup on its head.
What a catch! That is one of the best catches I've ever seen in my life.
A young Martin Snedden is celebrating the catch of his career. Or so he believes. But in the first controversy of the game, the Australian captain sees it differently.
He never looked like catching it. He made a brilliant bid to catch it. But as far as I was concerned from where I was, he hadn't got there.
I'm only 22 and he's one of the world's best players. I just sort of said to him I did catch it.
I've got to say I was in a unique position there because I was right there in his face sort of thing. Way too young, way too new to have a crack at him. Honestly, older guys would have given it to him, I think. I was just so in awe of Greg Chappell and so new that I just stood there looking at him and waiting for a reaction, and there was none.
I'm not someone who's going to go until the umpire tells me to go, so I waited for the umpire's decision.
And the umpires have said that's not out.
That's the way it is. In cricket, you wait for the umpire's decision.
And Howard is having a word with umpire Cronin.
I went up to the umpire and said, why is that not out? And the umpire said, I didn't see him catch it. And I said, you didn't see him catch it? What were you looking at? He said, I was watching the batsman touch down behind the line as they were running between the wickets. And I said, you're joking.
We had a great relationship with the Aussie cricket team. We did not have the same relationship with their umpires. There was a a definite feeling in our camp that they were competent, but to be honest, not to be trusted when the pressure was on.
Mike Burgess there, showing he still has some sense of humour.
Having stared down the Kiwis, Chappell scored another 32 runs before being caught by Bruce Edgar in a virtual replay of Snedden's effort.
Greg Chappell plays one away, and there's another one taken out there. Beautiful catch this time. Greg Chappell's on his way. What a magnificent catch.
Oh, I thought, woof, this is one for me. And I had a good crack at it, and next minute the thing stuck in the hand.
Well, justice has been done, even though just a little late.
Just the thrill of doing that and then looking up to see Greg actually tuck the bat under his arm and walk off.
The last ball of the Australian innings.
But the damage was done. Chappell's controversial 90 helped the Australians to what looked like an unbeatable position.
So the Australian total, 4 for 235.
That was a good score at the MCG, yeah, definitely. You know, 230, 240 was a defendable score.
Mate, you shouldn't get beat.
So New Zealand, 236 to win. Here's Dennis Lilly now in the first over. He's bowling to right.
Walking into the cauldron of the MCG, the New Zealand opener Bruce Edgar knew the Kiwis were up against it. He was going to have to play the innings of his life.
John Wright and I walked out together and we go, oh, it's noisy already. And people banging on the sideboards. And really, they wanted us pretty quickly. They didn't want any resistance, and we thought, well, we better do something about it.
It's in the air, but it's safe. Well struck. That's just what New Zealand needed at this stage.
With the temperature now into the 40s, the young left-hander set about making the Australians work in the punishing heat.
The boundaries were huge, and it just seemed forever. You know, you've hit it, and the ball's running, and it's still running, and it's still running.
That's a good shot.
The Australians made 235. You thought there was absolutely no way that New Zealand is going to be able to catch that. But then things turned around.
It's a fine shot. That could be 4 more. My word, New Zealanders starting to pick up their run rate.
We were getting frustrated by the fact that we couldn't seem to not only not get him out, but we weren't able to slow him down from scoring.
Well, he's got that one away. And
he still seemed to be able to work it into the gaps, and you know, he always ran well. He always ran hard.
A good shot. Great shot.
For the first time in the match, Chappell finds his game plan isn't working, and he has no answer to the stubborn Kiwi opener.
Shot from Bruce Edgar.
Bruce Edgar, who was, of course, my great sort of spontaneous hero that summer, batted absolutely superbly. You know, it was a demonstration of the old-fashioned art of one-day batting. He manoeuvred the ball beautifully around the field.
There he goes. Edgar 101. Tremendous innings under pressure. Standing ovation for the little left-hander.
In cricket, New Zealand had always been the junior, the deferred to nation as far as Australia was concerned. But in that period, they were starting to become much better, more competitive, winning games.
The Australians were tested. You could tell that they were struggling to get the game under control. There was a sense that you were about to see perhaps to see something remarkable happening, even as the game entered its final overs.
Well, that's in the air and it's way down.
For Greg Chappell, losing was unthinkable. He took it upon himself to bowl Australia back into the game, knocking over the Kiwi captain, Jeff Howard. But living up to Australia's expectations, as well as his own, was exacting a heavy toll.
That was a challenging task to bat, to captain, to bowl 10 overs. And I know I was struggling, mentally and physically. I was struggling to sleep, I was struggling to eat. And, you know, it was starting to really affect my ability to perform. But, you know, I've always been a, you know, strong-willed character, I suppose, so I just kept pushing myself and pretending that it wasn't an issue. But obviously it was an issue because it all bubbled up on the MCG on February the 1st.
Against all expectations, New Zealand had played themselves back into the match. Desperate to win, Greg Chappell was about to impose on the little brother he used to boss around in their Adelaide backyard.
He was always a very quiet kid until you pushed him too far, and then watch out. You know, there was going to be an explosion. And I obviously pushed him too far one day in the backyard. I reckon he would have been 9. Yeah, it was obviously a very hot summer. I was a bit worried about some cracks appearing in the wicket. So I got the watering can out and I just gave it a light sprinkle.
And there was a wet patch on the wicket, and I said, I said to him, cheating, so-and-so, you've watered the wicket. He said, no, I haven't. He denied it for a little while.
Our father had left a small tomahawk sitting on the tank stand, and Trevor got to the tank stand and saw the tomahawk and decided that he probably had a better way to sort this out. So he picked up the tomahawk and he came after me.
Greg darted in and out of the trees for a little while, and then he decided I wasn't going to give up and he better make a bolt down the side of the house, and he high jumped the side gate, and I put the tomahawk into the gate.
Nearly 20 years later, the Chappell's backyard has become the Melbourne cricket ground, and the brothers' relationship is about to be tested again.
By the time I finished my 10 overs, I was pretty much on the last legs, and I then took myself out of the inner cordon and started fielding out on the boundary straight, just to give myself a bit of breathing space.
In those days, the Australian captain was imbued with superhuman powers. You expected him to do the extraordinary on a regular basis, and perhaps Greg had convinced us that he was capable of that. They still needed 15 to win, and Greg Chappell called on his brother to bowl the over.
Trevor Chappell now has the game in his hands, but he finds himself facing New Zealand's greatest player, Richard Hadlee.
Well, they used to chant a lot, Lily, Lily, and first time probably ever they were chanting Chappell, Chappell, and it was me, not Ian or Greg, and that sounded quite good.
He's hit that, and he's hit it well. It's going to Max Walker, and that's 4. My, what a start! Wow!
And that was just an absolutely classic Hadlee shot. He just boomed it, bang. And I thought, well, that was a great shot. Next one, hopefully, do the same again.
He's getting him out! Oh, well. Dear, oh dear.
It was such a crucial moment. I'd have to say I've never seen the umpire put his finger up so fast.
Hadlee gone, Trevor has Australia on the cusp of victory. But the contentious LBW leaves the Kiwis feeling robbed.
To be given out like that when he was probably our best bet of winning the game, because he could have hit the ball over the boundary, that really got up my goat.
New Zealand's hopes now lie with one of their greenest players, 23-year-old wicketkeeper Ian Smith, in his first season of international cricket.
I remember sort of feeling, wow, you know, here's a chance to do something. Here's a chance to be a, you know, perhaps a hero.
What a pressure out there. Wheels went everywhere. He's hit it well. Go for 2.
I wasn't experienced enough, in all honesty, to think about where can I hit this ball for 4. In my mind, I'm thinking singles aren't enough. Singles won't win it for us. So if it's there to hit, you have to hit it.
He's hit that, and that's runs. That's at least 1. He'll probably go for the second and test him out. He's going. He's made it. He's home. What a great effort. Ian Smith, crowd are stunned. Fine running between the wickets. Tremendous courage. Trevor Chappell, the bowler. 52,000 people in front of their seats. There you go.
My immediate emotion was I'd lost the game. You know, I had the chance to win it for us and I couldn't do it. I could have changed history, but I didn't.
With 1 ball to go, the best the Kiwis can hope for is an unlikely tie. Batting at number 10 is an inexperienced All Black double international. Brought into the team as injury cover, Brian McKechnie is now expected to perform a miracle.
And New Zealand's only hope now is a 6 off the last ball for a tie.
And McKechnie comes out, and from what we've seen, as I said, he couldn't hit the skin off a rice pudding. Built like Tarzan, bats like Jane. He's not going to hit it anywhere at all, McKechnie. So I'm thinking, home and hosed, they need 6. If he goes for a big wango, it's got to go over mid-wicket, and that's the longest boundary. It's over 100 metres. It'd be at least 100 metres or more, and he's got to clear the fence.
I knew what was required at that point. Long walk from the dressing room to the middle of the Melbourne cricket ground. And while I'm walking out there, I'm thinking now, shortest boundary straight over the bowler's head. So I'm thinking, that's where I've got to try and hit it.
That's when I noticed Greg still sitting on the ground with his knees sort of up, and as I'm walking back to my mark, he gets up and heads towards my bowling mark.
I don't know that I was necessarily thinking about much at all. And all of a sudden this bright idea came to mind, and it was, you know what, I've had a gutful of this. You know, the whole thing that's been rolling on now for, well, a couple of years since World Series cricket, but had been going on for a number of years before World Series cricket. These people aren't listening. And I'm just about fed up with it. I wonder if they'll take notice of this. And I walked up to Trevor and I said to him, how are you bowling your underarms? His eyes rolled back in his head and he said, I don't know. And I said, well, you're just about to find out, because that's what you'll be bowling.
Following his brother's orders, what Trevor Chappell is about to do will divide two nations and change cricket forever. As his little brother faces off against an All Black needing a 6 to tie off the last ball, Greg Chappell's had a gutsful of being captain. He's about to stage an unprecedented protest.
Just bowl the ball and we all clap, shake hands, and we're off. We won another one. And it wasn't until the umpire sort of gave it that one, and I thought, what's he doing that for?
Well, it looks to me as if they're going to bowl underarm off the last ball.
At one game each, an Aussie win means an exhausted Greg Chappell can avoid his team playing a 5th game. Desperate for rest, he'll do anything to guarantee victory.
I went to Don Weezer, I think, who was at the bowler's end, and I said, Don, Trevor will be bowling underarm. His eyes rolled back in his head.
And then he walked over to me and said that the bowler was going to bowl this ball underarm. And it was sort of stunned. I can't really say what I said, but it was along the lines of, you got to be joking.
I immediately thought, well, you can't bowl a grubber. You can't bowl a mully grubber well, you can't bowl one. You're not allowed to. As I said, I wouldn't bowl it to my brother in the backyard.
And I could hear Rod Marsh behind me sort of saying, no, don't do it, don't do that, mate, or words to that effect.
In the confusion, the only senior Australian player aware of what's happening is wicketkeeper Rod Marsh. He sees a disaster unfolding, but his captain isn't listening.
Rod Marsh is saying, no, mate, but I'm sure he's going to bowl an underarm delivery.
And he's saying, no, don't do it. And I just shrugged my shoulders and said, you know, don't tell me, tell him. But he didn't do that.
I'm not sure that in the frame of mind that I was in at that stage that I would have taken any notice of him anyway. But it probably would have saved a lot of angst for a lot of us, not least of all Trevor, if somebody had been grown up enough to stop me from doing what I did.
I wasn't thinking, oh, I shouldn't be doing this. I was thinking, that's what the captain wants me to do. That's what I got to do.
The umpires have been told, the batsmen have been told, and this is possibly a little bit disappointing. They're going to bowl an underarm. We haven't believed it. That's a disappointing finish. Disappointed Brian McKechnie, the crowd boo. And it's all over. After 50 overs, New Zealand 8 for 229.
Trevor bowled the ball and it was a cracker. I mean, He bowled it absolutely perfectly, and it's not that easy if you haven't practiced bowling underarm to bowl one that's going to hit the stumps at the other end.
It wasn't just an underarm delivery that made it so difficult in that situation. It was the fact that it was all on the ground, that it basically arrived at the batsman's feet and was deliberately calculated to prevent a fair stroke.
So when he drizzied it underarm and McKechnie just then threw the bat, I thought, Jesus, what just happened there? It just seemed to happen in a split second before he even knew it was happening, because you didn't think you were allowed to do it.
No wonder the New Zealanders are disappointed, and none of them more disappointed than their skipper, Geoffrey Howard.
Well, I remonstrated with the umpires, saying that they'd made a complete and utter cock-up, that what had happened was totally illegal because the underarm bowling had been banned. I was totally wrong, and that had only been banned in England.
We couldn't even win the game. That was the thing, doing the maths. We needed 7 to win, 6 to tie. Why? Why? If you do the maths, why?
Was it the fact that it was his brother, younger brother, who looked up to his older sibling? Was he able to lean on him at a moment like that?
I would venture to say that I wouldn't have asked anyone else to do it.
As we started to head off, all of a sudden there was a couple of boos, but then by the time we got off the ground, there was people booing everywhere.
That feeling when we got off the ground into the change rooms was surreal. It was just dead silence. One of the selectors, Sam Loxton, sort of come down the stairs. He actually started crying as he said it. He said, "You may have won the game, but you lost a lot of friends." And that didn't do a lot to the morale in the changes, I must say.
There was a phone in the room, and the phone rang, and I answered it, and it was some guy from Perth, I think was the first call, who wanted to talk to Greg. And I said, "Oh, sorry, mate, he's not available now." So the call must have come into the MCG and just put directly through to the room. I didn't tell him who I was, but I just said to him that Greg was unavailable, hung up the phone. It rang a little while later. It obviously took the call a bit longer to come from New Zealand than it had from Perth. There was a Kiwi on the phone, wanted to speak to Greg as well, and I said, "No, I'm sorry, he's not available." And again, I didn't tell him who I was.
The immediate memory that stays in my mind is Mark Burgess, who was vice-captain of the team and obviously one of the great players of New Zealand cricket history towards the end of his career at that stage. He must have been drinking a cup of tea or coffee, and he had a little cup in his hand. And once we sort of realised what happened, I can remember him standing up and launching this cup at the side wall of the viewing room, and the cup just didn't sort of break apart. It powdered. Such was the force of that Burge had thrown it with.
Rod Marsh came out of the Australian dressing room as I was just about to go into the New Zealand dressing room, and he just took me aside, or made sure there was no one around. He said, "Don't tell anyone or my mates about this, but I just want to apologise to you for what happened." Which I thought was a great gesture, particularly coming from such a hard-nosed, competitive son of a gun like Rod Marsh.
After drinking for an hour or two in the dressing room, normally all the fans had gone. We walked outside, there must have been, I reckon, a couple of thousand fans still there, waited that long for us. And I think at that point, we realised, I think that was the very moment, having left the shell of the dressing room and that we realised how the world was going to take this.
As the cricket world struggled to make sense of Greg Chappell's bizarre decision, and if it was even legal, one of the game's most respected voices already had a theory.
I think it was a disgraceful performance from a captain who got his sums wrong today, and I think it should never be permitted to happen again. As it turned out, the sums were done so badly that Trevor Chappell was left to bowl the 50th over. It was panic stations.
Richie's inference was that, I'd got my sums wrong and Dennis should have been bowling. But Dennis had bowled out. I wanted to get him over and done with while the ball was reasonably hard.
He's a very good cricket captain. And he knew how to win, and he knew what it took to win. at all costs, and he knew because it was legal at the time to do it, he had it up his sleeve.
I mean, I always got the playing conditions at the start of each season and went through it line by line just to see if there's anything that had changed that I needed to know about. And, you know, to my knowledge, underarm bowling had never been made illegal.
The board deplores Greg Chappell's decision to instruct Trevor Chappell to bowl the last ball of the match underarm. Whilst acknowledging that this action is within the laws of the game, it is totally contrary to the spirit in which cricket has and should be played.
The Australian Cricket Board suddenly found themselves having to admit their own series rules had made possible the inconceivable.
The host country set up the playing conditions, negotiated them with the visiting countries and signed off. And I guess no one really contemplated there would be an underarm delivery bowled or thrown or moved or however you can describe it at that level. It was just not what you did in the game.
It was unthinkable. It never occurred to anyone that someone would use that artifice to win a game or to prevent a game being lost.
We, the board, had to decide what action needed to be taken with Greg. My own view about it was very much it was a silly thing to do, but it wasn't an illegal thing to do. And as far as I was concerned, I wasn't going to see Greg Chappell hung, drawn and quartered over a mistake.
Had they been in a position to sack me as captain, they would have. They wouldn't have got any argument from me, I can promise you on that. But as I understand it, their legal advice was that they didn't have a leg to stand on because I hadn't done anything wrong.
Chappell may not have broken the rules, but underarm outrage went all the way to the beehive.
I described Greg Chappell's actions as an act of cowardice, which I believe it was, and I thought it was most appropriate that the Australian team was dressed in yellow. I said it was the most disgusting episode that I could recall in the history of cricket, a game which used to be played by gentlemen.
It's Australia stuffing us again. It's Australia putting their foot on the throat. It's Australia snuffing out any semblance that we might be able to beat them. It's Big Brother just pounding Little Brother back into the ground again.
But even the one man in Australia more important than the cricket captain wasn't backing Chappell.
I do think it's a great pity that it occurred. It's certainly contrary to the traditions of the game. It's contrary to the traditions of the Chappells themselves. And, I'd be very surprised if they weren't both well aware of that now.
I'd been playing cricket that day, and we finished early for whatever reason, and we were up at a local pub. And it didn't have a TV in the pub, but someone had a television on the roof of a car outside. And we were watching this unfold as it developed towards a close finish. And then, of course, when it happened, everyone looked around and said, "What's he doing? He's going to bowl underarm." "Oh, you're joking. You can't do that." And so there was, even amongst biased Australians playing against New Zealand, a sense of outrage that Greg Chappell had lost the plot and told his younger brother, Trevor, who he probably told to do something similar to in the backyard years before, to bowl underarm.
For the Kiwis yet to return home, an avalanche of telegrams let them know they weren't the only ones feeling shortchanged.
6, 7, 9 pages someone's written. As a Dinka Mozzie cricket follower, I deplore the actions taken by the Australian captain. Legal it may have been, cricket it was not. Don't let their underarm tactics get you down, cause they smell. It was as bad as anything the Englishmen did in the Bodyline series of 1932-33. From Lady Henley. Dear Jeff and team, I think you guys are fantastic, especially after the way Australia acted on Sunday. I think they dress in the right colours anyway. Yellow for cowardness and green for envy. Yours, Sandy, aged 12. Kiss, 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 kiss. Lovely. One from Mum and Dad. That one, yeah. Proud of you. Keep smiling. God bless.
I got a letter from India that came snail mail and arrived much later. It was a very emotional, I think it was one of those aerogram letters, international letters, but he'd used every swear word he could think of, this fellow. And then at the bottom of it, he just said, "Great big bullshit to all," he finished his letter off with. So, it did trigger a few funny moments.
But there was genuine anger and shame from both sides of the Tasman. The public turned on Greg.
Greg had always looked rather upright and a bit of a pillar of the establishment. When it was demonstrated that Greg had this kind of extra gear of competitiveness, people began to feel a degree of ambivalence about him.
And that ambivalence was right in Greg's face when the Australian hero walked out to a hostile home crowd in Sydney just 2 days after the Underarm. After hiding in a hotel room since the Underarm, Greg Chappell emerged for Game 4 of the World Series Cup Finals in Sydney, defiant. His extraordinary protest at the captain's workload had only intensified the pressure. Suddenly, he was not only shooting for the win, but for redemption too.
Greg, a lot of pressure on you today, particularly in light of what's happened the last couple of days. Do you feel it at all?
Not really. I don't feel any more pressure than for any other game, really, Ken.
Yeah.
New Zealanders in the crowd made it quite plain they were out to avenge that grubber. The boys on the hill had special greeting for the Chappell brothers.
We went to Sydney for the next ground and Greg Chappell got roundly booed as he walked out to bat. It was staggering to see an Australian hero roundly booed.
With even his own fans against him, the Aussie captain found moral support from an unlikely quarter.
I can remember walking out from the players' dressing room and Jeff Howarth was fielding and I had to walk very close to him to go to the far end where I was to take strike.
He walked past me as on the way to the crease and all this booing was going on and I patted him on the backside and I said, "You don't seem to be too popular out here tonight."
He just walked over and he patted me on the bum and he said, "Good luck, mate." Probably the greatest act of sportsmanship that I ever was on the receiving end of in my career.
And a moment of karma for Martin Snedden, who just 2 days after his catch was denied, finally got Greg Chappell out.
He scored a magnificent 80, I think, from memory. He got a standing ovation off. So I thought, well, there we go. She's done and dusted. Till we got home. And we came home as heroes and we lost the series.
I don't think we really understood initially, even weeks or months afterwards, how much an impact this particular incident would have on our lives, especially those who are taking part, myself, and especially the Chappell boys.
It's part of the kind of folklore of Australia and New Zealand relations. And clearly, as far as New Zealand cricket was concerned, it was a terrific shot in the arm for the game.
It was probably the most significant positive event that ever happened in the history of New Zealand cricket. We had struck gold in that suddenly we had something in our hands, being the victims of the deadly underarm, that we could probably hold against the Australians for the rest of our lives. So, there was a slight, quiet satisfaction in that fact.
It brought cricket very much into the eyes of the public. In fact, for a little while there, we might have been bigger than the All Blacks. For a little while, just a little while, but thank you, Greg Chappell, for that.
In New Zealand a year later, Chappell had to enter the Lions' Den at a sold-out Eden Park, where outraged Kiwi fans saw him as public enemy #1.
Yeah, I was on edge a bit before the game because I wasn't quite sure what sort of reaction I would get from the New Zealand people. I was walking out, so they all started to let me know what they thought of the underarm and anything else that they could think of. And then all of a sudden, out of the corner of my eye, I saw this bowling ball appear and a great roar from the crowd, which probably drew my attention somewhat. Had a bit of a chuckle to myself, but all that did was make me more determined to, do well that day. And, it turned out to be a terrific cricket match.
Short one, it's gone straight up in the air.
Chappell made peace with New Zealand the only way he could, scoring a memorable century.
The standing ovation when I walked off was quite amazing. I don't think that I experienced anything else like it in my cricket career. It was quite a moving experience because it was the last thing that I expected to happen the first game back in New Zealand.
Greg Chappell captained Australia for 3 more years, cementing his status as a great. But his decorated career remained tarnished by the one decision he still struggles to explain.
I wasn't even aware until that day, and even almost to that moment, of just how strung out I was and how unfit to captain Australia I was until that moment. And it really was a brain snap, and it was like, I've had a gutful of this, and this is what I think of it. It needed something like that. I'm glad in some ways that it wasn't worse than it was. I know I can't erase it, and it's irrelevant even thinking about it. In a fleeting moment every now and then, I think, wouldn't it be nice if I'd never done it?
Certainly, life would have been easier for Greg's younger brother Trevor, who's never been allowed to put the underarm scandal behind him.
He was the innocent bystander in all of that, and he's copped plenty from all directions over the years, and probably is only known for that, which is rather unfortunate and unfair. And for that, I'm profoundly sorry. I certainly wasn't thinking of that on the day when I asked him to bowl it.
Up at the stumps, the wicket's a bit slow, so make it hard for him to score.
Trevor's international career lasted 2 more years, but none of his achievements would trump the one delivery he's best remembered for.
Greg said to me, "Do I need to apologise?" And I said, "No, you don't." But I'm not looking for an apology. I don't hold any animosity or anything towards Greg or blame him that it's messed my life up in any way. As far as I can see, I don't think it has. It sort of just keeps cropping up. It's something I'd like to sort of leave behind, but somebody keeps returning it to me all the time. It's like a bit of baggage that you don't really want to keep leaving it, and somebody says, "Here, mate, I think this belongs to you." Who'd remember who Trevor Chappell was if it wasn't for the underarm?
Underarm bowling may have been consigned to history, but the ball itself still casts a spell over fans, with both sides of the Tasman laying claim to the ball that changed cricket.
So yeah, this is it, the underarm ball.
Whether it's the one treasured by the Beige Brigade here in New Zealand, or the official underarm ball on display here at the Wacker Museum in Western Australia.
With all due respect to Brian McKechnie, not one of the big hitters of the game, it was very unlikely that a 6 was going to be hit.
The chances of Brian hitting any delivery for 6, probably 0.
He might have been right in rugby, but as a batsman, he was a shocker.
I'll tell you right here and now, Brian McKechnie would not have hurt a 6. And I think he'd agree.
I walked out there with the belief that I was going to, and you had to have that belief. Was it likely to happen?